Hey guys, today a slightly different format video. We're going to be going over the pricing of one of our most popular videos by far that we've had, which is our Subaru EJ Engine build video. Mike did a great job of going over all the details of all the parts, so if you're looking for that, please refer back to that video. But this specific one's going to be going over the most asked question, which is how much is this going to ultimately going to cost me? So
we get thousands of emails literally about how much does the engine cost and how does it break down. And since Martin is the accounting side of the thing, I'm the tech side, Martin's going to help price a lot of this stuff, and we can answer some questions on how to stage it up to make it affordable for you.
Exactly, because there is a little bit of a sticker shock when we give you the price of what that one engine costs. I mean, that's 25 grand once you really add it all up. But that may not necessarily be the option for your build or what your goals are. So that's kind of
most of you probably don't need that. Most of you just have something that like an old WRX that the engine blew, and you just want something to be more reliable at a reasonable power level.
Exactly. Yeah, not everybody necessarily needs to ball out. So we're going to go right into it, right?
Yep.
We're going to start with the engine block. Machining is definitely the first part that you start with whenever you're going to be building an engine. So we figure we're going to look at it as engine's already been torn down, things have been inspected, parts have been ordered. So we have our piston size that we want. Now we're going to send it to the machine shop. So what's this going to cost me? We'll start with labor hours, which basically to build an engine tear down in full assembly here is $2,500. That's and then if you need to, for example, to be setting a specific valve latch because you've done a lot of valve train changes, add about another 3 to 4 hours to that, which is probably about $500. Our shop rate is $125 per hour, and that is as of right now, October of 2021, and that can change. So $2,500 for labor, and that's no matter which engine you go with. So whether you go super baller out or you just want to go with the with a very budget build, the amount of hours that we put into it to put the engine together still remain the same. So now we will move on to where the cost differences are, and we'll start with the block. Now, we got two prices: super baller build and our budget build. Super baller build is about $21.75 just for the machining. And what that will include is our bore and hone and also our align bore. Now, let's talk about align bore. Is that necessary or?
Well, the thing about Subarus is they have a pretty lightweight case, and like when you pick up a Subaru case versus like a block, for instance, there's a big difference in weight.
Absolutely.
And this light little piece of aluminum contains a lot of power compared to like other engines. So one thing about Subarus is that we find that a lot of times the case is pretty hammered, and so it requires more work than a lot of other motors. So usually that involves decking, align boring, and everything has to be done with fixturing on the Subaru. Because the Subaru case is so thin and lightly constructed, the act of bolting it together distorts everything. So you can't just go to your own machine shop and just have them bore or hone it out, because that's the big reason why like a lot of shop-built Subaru engines blow up or run really crappy or don't last. So we actually have to get a fixture to simulate one case half and the other, the cylinder head, and use whatever fastening system, be it stock bolts or studs or whatever, and put the correct torque so the whole case distorts like how it's going to distort when it's assembled, and then do all the machining. And because of the light construction, a lot of times, the mains get all crooked and distorted. So, like a lot of times it has to get a line bored, probably more than your typical engine. But we check everything, and we don't do it if it's not necessary, but a lot of times it is.
Okay. Now, again, we'll go really quick. We'll go back to total price for the full machine setup, which will include your bore and hone, resurfacing with the torque, bore and hone with the torque plates, resurfacing of the deck area, closed deck, dowel pin mains, and also even machining for the larger out front half-inch studs. That's $21.75. Now, what Mike's explained is that for your bare minimum machining that you'll need on your Subaru, which will be your bore and hone for your cylinders, your resurfacing of the mating area here, and then also the checking of your line bore, that's going to be your $300. Now, if we do need to align more, which you maybe should be prepared to do so in most used Subaru engines, that's another $375. So now we're up to $675 for bare minimum block machining and $2175 for the full baller layout. And again, refer back to the original video for the details on that.
Now, I think like a lot of our emails were not for the full baller engine, but just somebody that just wanted the more durable than stock engine.
Correct.
So in that case, we don't really think that, pinning the case halves and close decking the block is necessary. So maybe just a light hone to like one size bigger studs. And that's it. Just leave it open deck, and then use a good head gasket. It's good enough, probably up to like, well into the 400s.
And that's the main question I wanted to ask, because that really is what the customers really want to know out there is, how much horsepower will I reliably be able to run if I just do the bare minimum? I just want a reliable engine. What's that number? You're saying 400?
Probably
horsepower?
about 450 is where that'll happen, because primarily what happens in these EJ engines is the ringlands fail.
Okay.
And that's the first thing. So you probably close decking, it's not really necessary until you get past maybe 450. Okay. So as long as you're not getting too greedy, just some good forged pistons and good rods, stock crank is good enough.
Perfect. And the key here, guys, is also, again, like Mike mentioned earlier, it's not just going to any machine shop and saying, here, bore it out to this. The usage of torque plates is key and extremely important in any engine, but definitely with these EJs.
Yeah, like a Subaru, it can actually distort up to 2/10 of an inch in the bores when you bolt the cylinder head on. And 2/10 is like sometimes more than half of your total piston to wall clearance.
Right, exactly.
So if it's that out of round, man, that thing's not going to last.
Yep.
The
Things are going to wear out.
Rings aren't going to seal. And that's where you get a lot of the like one of the urban myths about Subaru engines is, oh, you can't build them. The best engine is just one from the factory. And that myth got started because people are just trying to treat them like a regular engine.
Not the proper usage of torque plates. Or
yeah.
Yep. So those are the details of the block machining that you need for the baller layout and also your more budget layout. Next thing would be balancing. There is nothing that you can do about that. No matter which route you take, we balance every internal rotating assembly of any engine that goes through our shop. So for the EJ, that is $200, and what basically we're doing is we're balancing the weights of the pistons, the rods, and then also making sure that your crank is straight and balancing the crank. And maybe let's talk a little bit on the benefits of that.
Well, basically, when something's spinning around, you kind of multiply the weight that something's out of balance. And, if it's out of balance, you start getting a lot of internal stress in the engine. Plus, the engine vibrates and stuff a lot. So, nowadays now that machining's getting more precise, balance is getting even more critical than ever.
Mm-hmm. And we will say that a lot of the times when you use really quality parts, quality pistons, quality rods, they usually are balanced, but also just there's nothing like being able to put something on a fixture, spinning it, and really making sure that all of the mixture of your parts are working well together. Individually, they may be balanced, but it's also sometimes things change once you actually start putting them on together and spinning them and taking them through their spins. So that's balancing. And then we'll go on to our two expensive processes that we go through with our baller builds, which are WPC and also cryogenic treatment of the metal parts. WPC for basically everything, which is going to be the block, the heads, the valves, the pistons, not the bearings because the bearings are coated, so we don't do that on the bearings. But basically all the moving parts inside of your engine
too.
And the crank. We're looking at $2,750 for WPC, and then also $2,900 for the cryogenic treatment. Now, do you need to necessarily get everything? No. If you have detailed questions on how much is just the crank by itself, how much is it, go ahead and email us that MotoIQ garage request link on the top of our homepage, and then you can send us those questions individually if you really want to know. Each process is about a week that it takes for each one. But yeah.
I would say that, it's not absolutely necessary to do this if you're on a budget. But, if you plan to track the car or keep it a long time, it sure doesn't hurt.
Absolutely.
And, we found in like a lot of our full race engines that we do that, these things probably can make the engine go like maybe double the time between rebuilds. Now, this is a race motor. So on the street, that's got to make a pretty big difference too.
Absolutely.
And also, the amount of friction is reduced, and the overall life of the components, besides the wear, gets a lot better. Now, if it's something like you're not going to keep the car for a long time, then you just want to get it running, it's probably not worth it. But if you're actually racing, and that's the main thing, if you're racing, we think this should be done. Or if you do a lot of track days, we probably think that should be done. But if it's a pure street car, I mean, that's kind of up to you, I kind of think, right? Yeah.
And would you say, at least in my mindset, some of the two more expensive parts to do are the block, at least on any engine, WPC and Cryo, because it's just the size of the part. I would venture to say that for your total budget guy, you just want a reliable daily driver, not a lot of power, it's okay to maybe skip the WPC and that on the block itself.
Or I'd say the pistons and rings.
But definitely high friction stuff like cams, that's a nice insurance policy on that.
Well, we have measured the bores on the engine that's been WPC and Cryo before and after, like a race motor, and we generally find a lot less distortion and wear on the bore. So I think that's just something that the consumer needs to decide if they want to spend that money or not.
And again, I'm trying to be the advocate here of the budget guy, and again, Mike is completely correct. We have plenty of race experience with the engines that we built here, and I've opened them up after a season of abuse, and it is clearly noticeable the differences between wear on the bores, or even the valve springs, especially the valve train area. We've seen big differences just from WPC and
cam and followers, huge difference.
Valve
in
springs,
wear.
Absolutely. So, is it worth it when you're in a race program? Absolutely. Is it worth it for your street car? That again, completely
kind of
depends
up to
on
you, but it's not as critical.
Yeah, and we can openly talk about that once you're ready to move forward with us building your engine. We'll talk, we can have a more detailed discussion about that. So that was everything about the block. Now we're going to move on to our headwork. Now, this is, I guess, where it really depends on what it is that you want to do. You don't necessarily need to refresh your heads necessarily if you're just trying to do a quickie refresh. Maybe not, but it is definitely something that you should really think of going through.
I think like if you're on the budget, what we should do is tear down your head, inspect it for wear, see how the valves are. If the valves are in good shape and the head's in good shape and your valve guide clearance is okay. Generally what we'll do is just a good valve job using a new valve machine. And a new one makes a huge difference. It's like instead of using cutters or stones, it actually is a CNC machine that cuts a contour from like the combustion chamber, cuts the sealing surface, and then actually extends into the port some. And what it does is it takes out most of the gaps like between the valve seat and the port, and it also smooths the step between the seat and the combustion chamber, so you kind of have like a smooth radius. Now this doesn't cost much more than a regular valve job, but it makes a huge jump in power compared to a valve job, and it actually, it does like a lot of, maybe almost like 40% of like what a full CNC port job will do. Okay. So, at the very minimum, if your heads aren't too hammered, we can surface it, do the valve job, and reuse all your stock parts.
Yep.
And that would be like a good base way to start.
And again, the big price difference here will really be the parts usage, because whether we're doing a refresh or we're doing a full bar build, a new valve job is going to be the same cost, and that's $600. We get that done by our bros over at D-Sport in Fountain Valley. Now, porting is an additional 600, and that is just for the main, the machine porting job.
Yeah.
And then once the heads get back to us, then we can even go another step and do some hand blending, correct?
Yes, but I would say you don't really need to do CNC unless you're trying to get more than 500 horsepower. Like you can probably be served with the new and valve job and a little hand blending, all the way up to 500.
Okay. So there's your pricing there. So new and valve job on baller or budget build at $600. Porting, obviously needed for the baller build at $600. Not necessarily needed for your budget build. And then we have a resurfacing, which is $125, which will be needed on either option.
Sometimes, like on the Subarus, it's not like super common, but you get to where everything's hammered, and then you have to replace valve guides and seats. And when it gets to that point, there's a couple things you can do. Like we could put like a 1mm oversized valve and salvage your stock seats. But usually if your seats are all eroded, by then your valve guides are kind of wasted. So we usually put like bronze valve guides, which last a lot longer and conduct the heat out. We usually use like oversized valves, like a nitrided stainless intake and an in-canal exhaust, which is super nice stuff. Because if everything's hammered, you might as well.
Yeah, you got to replace them anyway.
And that's kind of the next step. And then if you're actually doing racing and time attack, where you're on the throttle for long periods of time, we've kind of found that, like especially cars running ethanol or E85, that they don't protect the valve seats very well because alcohol doesn't have good lubricity. So the valve seats get pounded out of the head. So then
oh, that's right, that late model EJ that we saw coming through here. Even some of that popping you just heard, some of these things that lead to this, of people just hammering their valve strings for no apparent reason and adding extra heat in places they shouldn't.
So, if you're running an ethanol car on the track, we usually put the beryllium valve seats or the beryllium replacement valve seats. They last a lot longer and they can kind of conduct the heat out of the valve. So that's another step we could do.
Now these are additional services and obviously additional costs that are involved with them. Those are not taken, the replacing of the valve seats is not taken into the quotes that we're giving you, but it's something we can talk about should your build need that, or should you need an upgraded seat.
I would say only if you have an ethanol car on the track. That's
the only time you need that.
Yeah.
All right.
You've kind of seen that too, right? Like,
no, absolutely. Even on street cars that are running ethanol, just how hammered the valve seats and the sealing surface of the valves themselves are. It's crazy, but
yeah, E85 is a lot harder on your valves and your valve seats.
So super worth to run that ethanol lube that you run on your street
right.
cars.
In fact, like if you run E85 all the time, it's hard on your cylinder walls and rings too.
Yeah, you're just basically spraying alcohol. Think of what alcohol does to your fingers. Imagine doing that to parts that need lubrication inside of your engine.
Yeah, one of the things is gasoline. When you put on your hand, you can feel it's slippery and it has kind of an oiliness to it, and your engine actually appreciates that and it lends lubricity to things. But alcohol, if you pour alcohol on your hand, it's all dry, and alcohol doesn't have any lubricity at all, so it's a lot harder on things. And again, this is where WPC and cryo treating come into play.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you're going to be running E85 mostly, maybe it's a good idea to do that,
especially on your track car. All right, so those are the two main components of your engine. You got your block and your heads, and now we're going to start talking about the details of the aftermarket performance parts, or whether you need them for your budget build. So much like the first portion of our video where we went over the block and the heads, we're going to do the same thing with the parts involved in both of those. So we'll start off with our block, and the first part of our block will be our crank. For our EJ builds, we've been using Eagle cranks that have great luck with them and have nothing but good things to say about them. But I guess we've been getting some bad comments, so we're going to let Mike give you a little breakdown on why you should trust Eagle.
Well, we've had some comments in our video criticizing our use of Eagle in our engines, but people say things like, "Oh, that's a Chinese crank or something," but the crank is pretty much an American part. With Eagle, the raw forging is done in Asia because I guess it's a process that's kind of hard to get done in the U.S. Because of regulations and stuff. But it's done with certified American steel, so it's like, in the case of this crank, it's 4340. It's not some random steel sourced from some weird spot. So it's good American 4340, high nickel, high chromium metal. That's one of the best crank materials. So the raw forging is done overseas, but it's brought to the U.S. and all the finished machining and other processes is done in Eagle's factory right here in the USA. So the machining, the quality assurance, and all that is all American. Same thing with their rods. And, we can run whatever rod and crank you want in our builds. I mean, we have a good relationship with Callies or Arrow or Carrillo, but we feel that this is a good value. We run this stuff in full race engines, and we've never had a single problem.
Yeah.
I mean, even engines have been like really brutally abused.
Yeah, race LSs or even our own personal SR engines, we haven't had a single issue with them.
Yeah, I mean, and like you've raced yours for like season after season after season, right?
Still running strong.
And that's a turbocharged engine too, turbocharged road race motor. The Eagle rods, same thing. The raw forging is done overseas, but all the finish machining, all the engineering, and QC and everything's done right here in America. The rod bolts are ARP, the best. We're using the Extreme Duty that has the Super Trick custom age 625 rod bolts that are super strong. I mean, I have no qualms about using them. Like we've never had one measure out of spec or anything, and we do measure everything before we assemble it.
So with that said, so you know where the pricing falls. Our Eagle crank is $1,200. And our long rod setup here is $650, and that includes the additional higher performance studs for it as well.
Rod bolts.
The rod bolts, sorry, the hardware for it. So again, value oriented, but not necessarily cutting corners. They're perfectly amazing parts to use. Now we'll continue with our block parts. We'll move on to our piston set, and it is a piston set because you get your pistons, you get your pins, your locks, as well as your ring set with it. Now this particular set, I believe it was about $700, but plan about $650 to $750 on your piston sets. It's all going to be depending, on coatings or what the different variations that you can have.
And we only use top shelf pistons, like we use JE, CP, or Mala mostly. We use pretty much the best, and we don't cut corners. One of the other cool things we do is we always get a oversized ring pack, and we hand fit each ring to every bore.
Absolutely.
Get the ring gaps perfect, because that's critical for sealing and long life. You get the ring gap too tight, especially on the turbo motor. When everything expands, they'll butt, and then they'll start scuffing your bore. Too loose, you don't have enough ring tension, and you have a lot of blow-by and
lose compression.
Yeah, lose compression, not good sealing, lose power, and it'll wear out pretty quick. So we hand fit all the rings.
And equally as critical are your engine bearings, both your connecting rod and your main bearings. And we have exclusively been using King race bearings, actually on most of the builds here at MotoIQ. Now you'll see that we have 2 sets of mains and 2 sets of connecting rod bearings. And the reason we do that is because we like to get our specs just right. So sometimes we'll be mix and matching. So we normally end up using a standard set and one oversized set, just so we can get those tolerances nice and tight.
If it's a popular engine that we do a lot, we probably have a bunch of different bearing sizes in stock, but if you have a weird engine, we may have to order a couple sets of bearings just so we can get your clearances perfect.
Exactly, yes.
And I guess that's another thing I got to lead into, where like a lot of engine builders that are like subpar where they mess up. They just buy whatever bearing, slam it in there, and maybe plastic gauge it or something.
Yes.
So what we do is we actually measure all the clearances with micrometers, so we get it perfect. And today with the modern engine with aluminum blocks, what happens is they expand a lot with once they come up to temperature. So if you just have whatever clearance, or even if your clearance is at the wide end of the factory allowable clearance,
It's going to happen when it gets to operating.
yeah, when it gets hot, your clearances will get super big, and then your engine will have problems with like low idle oil pressure. Like sometimes it could even be close to zero. And then when it's at high RPM, it'll be like really minimum. Like let's say at max RPM, it could be barely making 35 or 40 PSI. So what we do is we set aluminum blocks kind of like on the tight side, so your oil pressure will always be good. And this is like a mistake we see quite a bit, right?
Absolutely, especially once we tear down builds from other places. We'll leave it at that.
And I think this is something like with our experience that we found that just with late model aluminum blocks, you have to be really careful.
And this is where sometimes even we get a little pushback on our labor costs for engine assembly, and that's where the additional time goes, guys. It's not just about slapping the parts that you sent us over here. It's we double check and triple check everything. It's a matter of you torque down your rods with your bearings in and you check with the micrometer. Same thing with your mains, and that all takes time, and it's time that is well invested now, and that will lead to having an actually well-performing and reliable engine.
I guess another step is that we always assemble our rod bolts with stretch, and that's a lot more time consuming than just whamming it down with a torque wrench.
Absolutely.
We have to have like a fixture for the micrometer and do it really carefully. So like there's like torque for rod bolts, but then the precise way to do it is you measure how much the rod bolt actually stretches, and that's the way to get the most accurate reading, and it's critical for rod bolts. You can have your rod bolt slightly under torqued, and they'll actually decrease its fatigue life by up to 100%.
Oh.
Yeah. So.
And how does that work out? Is that from just additional strength?
Like high cycle fatigue. It's all kinds of engineering stuff,
Okay.
but it's kind of like a hot rodder's thing that you don't want to make it too tight because it stretches and yields the bolt, but that's not true. You actually have to have it at its proper stretched tightness.
Okay.
So that's another like hot rodder's wife's tale that like we try to avoid.
So with that, our final piece for our block would be our fluid amper crank pulley, and that is something that is pretty key for these EJ engines.
Yeah, like they kind of vibrate a lot, and we found that actually helps quite a bit.
Yep. And it's noticeable. I mean, even on the dyno or on the street, it's a noticeable difference that we found. Now we'll go back to pricing again. Now we didn't mention the prices for our bearings. Connecting rod bearings for the EJ currently are at about $75, while your mains are about $135 a set, and our fluid amper crank pulley is about $420 MSRP right now. Now, one question that before we move on to the head that I like to pose is, how much of this is necessary for your budget guy? Your budget guy that wants to have, again, our budget target is about 450 wheel horsepower. Do we need a baller crank?
No, the stock crank is fine. I would say maybe even the extreme duty Eagles aren't necessary, just regular Eagle rods, a good set of forged pistons from our normal suppliers, good bearings, and careful assembly. That's all you need.
Awesome. So
for a basic motor.
So if you were to bring your engine here, we'll be magnafluxing your crank, making sure that it's straight. Maybe a little micro polish while we have it out at the balancer just to make sure it's cool. And it doesn't mean that you can't take your stock crank and apply WPC
or Cryo.
The Cryo on it. So There are a lot of options here. We are now going to move on to some of the head parts, but before we do that, a couple more block parts. Now, we have our upgraded ARP hardware, our engine that won't blow up video engine. That one did get machined by out front for the upgraded 1/2-inch studs. So that's what these are here for. Now that option is just for the hardware itself is an additional $550. Now let's talk about hardware and who needs it and who doesn't need it.
On a budget build where you're going 450 horsepower below, the stock hardware is probably good enough. We recommend going to all new stock hardware because, like a lot of times, the stock fasteners get stretched. We found that they actually get up to 10 thousandths longer, which is kind of a lot. Like that's 1/4 of a millimeter, and that's permanently yielded. Subarus have really long studs, so there's a lot of
area for
stretch to be going on. So. We always recommend replacing that with new OEM stuff, but if you're going into the 500 horsepower, high 400s, definitely we recommend studding the block.
Okay. Now then, with that said, now the final piece that we'll be bolting down to the block will be our oil pan. Now we recently did an IAG video for the IAG oil pan. This is the Killer B setup that we'll be using on our Bug-Eye WRX build. This setup here comes with your pan, your pickup, and
windage tray,
and that is currently at around $550 MSRP.
Now, a big question with our last video about the oil pan is people ask, what's better, IAG or Killer B? And I guess our answer is a lot of it is preference. They're both like excellent designs. I wouldn't have a problem using either one of these. The one thing that is absolutely mandatory for any EJ build, I don't know if you know this, is the oil pickup.
Oh.
And even if it's a total budget build, we recommend getting this heavy duty pickup because I personally know 3 people that this is broken.
So stock, you just have this, I'm assuming, and these joints here break, and that's why it's additionally braced here?
Yeah, and also the stock one's really thin. Oh. And they break on just stock cars being street driven. Like,
So with not even like damaging your lower oil pan, people are breaking these things.
Yeah, and then they blow the motor.
Oh, damn.
I mean, of the 3 people I know that broke this and blew their motors, only one of them was somebody that does track days. The other 2 were just my friends with kind of modified street cars, and it just broke in street driving. And it's a pretty common thing. So, heavy duty Killer B or IAG pickup mandatory for any build we do. And the pan's a really good idea too. Like a lot of it is, flat motors always stick a bunch of oil in the heads. It's just the nature of the beast. So you get a Subaru, you get a Porsche, they always have the problem.
Oh, because, obviously.
The oil sloshes, those pistons are flopping around, and, like a regular motor, the pistons are way up here, top. Oil goes down. But with a flat motor, the oil is like right around the vicinity of everything. Mm-hmm. So even like Porsches, they have like really complicated air oil separators and elaborate pans, and Subaru's no different.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Even in cornering, for example, high RPM cornering, you would think the problem would get even worse.
Right. So you get a good pan, windage tray, baffling. It has a lot of advantages, like your oil consumption goes down. A lot of these Japanese motors are about that era. They're on the thing to run the minimum oil capacity as possible to stop pollution. So you get a decent amount of oil. Like turbo engines need oil. They heat the oil, they foam the oil.
They're using the oil to sometimes even lubricate the turbo.
Oh yeah, so this never hurts, even in a mild street engine. So it's always good to get the pan and the windage tray and baffles, and for sure we need this.
We're gonna put that 550 there then on both of our ends of our builds, on our budget build and also on our baller build, just so you guys know. Now we're going to go into the key parts regarding our beyond the new end valve job and doing and setting your valve lash and setting all that properly, the hardware, which for this build specifically are our Kelford cams, our Kelford valve springs, and our SuperTech intake and exhaust valves. Now specifically, we actually just recently had a great call with the folks over at Kelford, and it is a great company to work with. We're super excited to even do more things with them. Yeah, just a ton of R&D that goes into their stuff. Now just, again, and key, it's not, your spring guys, don't do the thing where it's bigger is better. It is not. It's not just about ultimate seat pressure, because that could actually hurt things. So maybe you give us some breakdown on that.
Right, like I always talk about when you get a cam, to be sure to use the spring package the cam manufacturer recommends for their cam. Like a lot of times people will mix and match components between manufacturers, especially with these twin cam motors. A lot of times they put something with way too much seat pressure. You probably only need a lot of seat pressure if you're doing an all-out drag motor, you know, like a 800 or more horsepower Subaru engine, you know, running 40 plus pounds of boost. Some of the problems you'll run into is you'll beat up all your components, so like your valves will like sink really quick, your valve seats will get chewed up.
Mega accelerated wear from the additional pressures.
Even your cam followers, even your cam, and things that you don't even expect to happen will happen, like all your valve timing gear will wear, like your chains, your guides, your sprockets.
That makes sense, because yeah, I guess the chain is pulling the gear that's moving that valve spring. The more pressure there's there,
it's harder to turn everything, and it puts more stress on every single thing. Like your variable cam timing won't work correctly. That's why I like a lot of full race motors, they lock out the variable cam timing.
Controlling the minimum control, that becomes more difficult.
Right, so what you want to do is you get a super full race cam with the valve springs that are needed for that. You're going to have a lot more wear, but I mean, you know, that all comes, I guess, it's part of the game.
It's part of the, yep.
You're trying to make 1,000 horsepower on the Subaru motor, things are going to wear out and break.
And those engines are engines that you're going to go through multiple times a season, if not at least a minimum once every season. It's not like your street engine.
But yeah, by the time you're trying to break records in drag racing with the Subaru, you're going through the motor every weekend. You know, that's not what we typically do, but I mean, we could build a motor like that, but you know, it's going to be a weekend motor. And then that's the cost of glory, right?
Yeah. But we digress. With our Kelford setup, this is a good high-performance setup with a well-engineered match set of valve springs.
Right, you don't want to over-valve spring your engine. I guess that's what we mean in short, right?
Yeah. So our 199C cams are about $1,000, and our spring set is $600. Then we'll go into our black nitrided intake valves and then our Inconel exhaust valves that we have from SuperTech. Our pricing for that is exhaust valves are about $260 for the set, and the intake valves are about $175. Price difference being material.
And what we liked is this motor was a pretty well worn motor when we started. I mean, I think it had, what, 100 something thousand, 150?
150, yeah.
Which is a lot for a Subaru. And the valves are kind of sunk. What I mean by sunk is as the valve starts to wear, it actually sinks down into the seat. And that really screws up performance and really screws up low lift flow. So being 1 millimeter oversized, it enables us to cut a new seating surface even into the heavily worn valve seat. So even though the valve seats are pretty pounded, you know, we're able to machine a fresh, nice and high seat into that old one and reuse it and save a lot of money and get all the flow advantages of having a bigger valve at the same time.
Yep. And then with SuperTech, taking the advantages of the better material, especially on the exhaust side, using the Inconel.
Yeah, Inconel is like a semi-exotic alloy that's really good at high temperatures. And we like to use it with all of our turbo builds for sure. I mean, sometimes we use it on our NA builds.
Yeah. So again, the magic question being, Mike, what do I need?
So, if you have a budget motor, we take everything apart. All your stock stuff isn't all hammered and it's in decent shape. All we do is a new and valve job, maybe do a little hand blending, and you're good to go. To easily make 400 horsepower or even maybe 450. If your head is hammered, the next step is to like maybe go 1 millimeter oversize. Check your valve guides, make sure those aren't all worn out. The Subarus use like a shim and bucket kind of thing, and they don't terribly kill the valve guides, but Subarus tend to kill everything almost. So
And those are good parts to get WPC and cryo treated too, by the way.
so we'll check it, and we'll only replace what's needed. And
Yep.
if it's marginal, if you're the customer, we'll discuss what we think.
Where your
and-
needs are.
Yeah, and you can make the final decision.
Because you may not have a hammered head, but you may still want the advantages of the bigger intake valve and the better material on the exhaust side. So again, it all depends on the application, what you're going to be using your engine for, and that's something that we can definitely talk to you about and tailor your build to your specific needs. So yeah, that I guess is the pricing. So we're going to total it all up and give you a final breakdown of what our baller build is, what our budget build is, and then basically you guys just call us up and we'll start building your EJ engines here.
And if you're one of those people that says, well, my guy could do it for $5,000,
Go to your guy and then come to us once that engine blows up.
which will be really quick.
Yeah, so that is one question that I'm honestly, it sucks, but guys, it's really, speed is money. How fast do you want to go?
And life is money too, I guess, right?
Everything costs money, and if you're looking to cut corners, we're old guys, and I guess we consider us old guys, and we've cut corners in the past in our younger days, and always know that at the end of the day, you're gonna pay the price at the end if you want to go fast. So might as well do it right the first time. So let us get our calculators out. We'll be right back. Now we have our baller build, which is the other video that we've done, our most popular video yet. So go check that out, our EJ25 that won't blow up.
And we can also go more baller than that if you so desire.
Correct. We could go extreme baller. And then we have what we're considering our budget build, which will get you to around 400, 450 horsepower reliably, with good machining, good proper assembly procedures, so you can rest assured that your engine won't blow up immediately, at least at normal power levels.
Yep.
So without further
And
ado-
good tuning.
Yes, and good tuning, yeah, and that's completely out of our hands. You guys are on your own on that, and you can't blame us for that, or those pop tunes. More on that later. All right, so our baller build. Now, what I want to say first is that our total is going to include our labor, our machining, major basic parts, but these costs don't include your oil pump, your water pump, your gasket set that you need to get from Subaru, all those little nickel and dime pieces. So
Your hoses, a new alternator.
correct.
Your
So
clutch.
be ready for that. This is basically for your your assembled long block minus gasket set that you'll have to provide, or we can procure that for you. So our baller bill is $18,725. $3,000 is going to be for labor. Then $2,175 is going to be for the block machining and the studding and all those additional things that Outfront does. Then we have our cryo treatment, which is $2,900, $2,750 for the WPC, and then $200 for balancing. Then we're moving on to the heads. That's $1,700 for all the headwork, and that's for the baller headwork, which would be your new and valve job, your resurfacing, your porting, and your hand blending. That doesn't include R&Ring of bad valve guides or horribly damaged valve seats or something along those lines. We have to replace seats. Then the parts that we went over, the quickie total on that is $6,000 for those parts. So that brings us to our $18,725. Now, our budget build. Labor cost is the same, still the same $3,000 for labor. $300 for machining, because now we're only going down to using the torque plates to just do your bore and hone and your resurfacing. $200 still the same for balancing. Then we have our $725 for headwork, which will be your new and valve job and just resurfacing, just basics on that. Then for parts, we're going to total that up to $2,600. And what we're using as that total is our bare minimums of what we feel most people should do for a nice build, which would be your rods, your upgraded Eagle rods, upgraded JE piston set, your fluid amper crank pulley, your King race bearings, and also either your Killer Bee or your IAG oil pan setup. Those will be our bare minimum parts. And that brings us to a total of $6,825. So basically $10,000 less than the baller bill. So you have $18,725, $6,825 for the budget build. Again, not including the accessories that go all over your engine, and minus gasket set.
Now, I guess what we could say is we're not going to go cheaper than our budget build, because to go cheaper than that, we're cutting corners, and you're not going to be satisfied with that. On the baller side, we can go a lot more. I mean, we could do a billet case,
beryllium seats,
dry sump, all kinds of things like that. And, you know, we could use like a super high-end crank and rods. You know, the sky's the limit. You know, that'd be like maybe a $25,000, $30,000 build.
Agreed.
But, I mean, that's total full race, and we could bias it toward road racing or drag racing.
Yeah, so if your budget is under $7,000, not to be rude, but honestly, I don't think will be a good match to work with, because the additional work that we put into the assembly and the processes that we do on our engine builds, yes, they're more time consuming, yes, they cost a little bit more money, but that is the bare minimum we're willing to do on anything we're going to put our name on. So, and
I don't think too many people that are any good could do it for much cheaper than that.
Yeah, classify the key statement there being any good. Because any yo bro shop will tell you, yeah bro, I'll do that, I'll just swap the engine out, you know, do a little rebuild, and cost you like $3,000. We've actually had people tell me that it's costing like $3,500 for that. I don't know how people do that.
I actually have a friend that has a EJ, and he's on a total budget because, you know, he's like a young kid in his 20s. And he had some shop, like I told him how much we charge. He goes, oh, dude, I can't afford that. So he had some other shop build him a motor, and, you know, with forged pistons and stuff, but, you know, without the good machining and all that. And now his engine, like, makes so much piston slap noise that he can't tune it properly because, you know, it's reading all this
Sounds like knock.
Yeah, like false knock count. And so the thing's wanting to pull out timing and all that, and he can't get it to run stably. Plus it burns oil, and it has like low compression. But, you know, it's because they didn't machine it with the torque plates and all that. They just
or set proper clearances on their bearings, or any of those very important steps, guys. Labor intensive, but very important to the longevity and performance of your engine.
And he's really bummed because he goes, man, I could have saved for 6 months and just had you do it. And then I'm going, yeah, sorry, dude.
So, well, guys, hope you guys enjoyed the pricing, the more details on what the real world, what this is going to cost you for your build. Now, if you have additional questions, you know how to get a hold of us. MotoIQ.com, MotoIQ Garage service requests on the top of the page. Send in your emails. We'll be happy to help you. We also do some consulting if you wanted to do that. We charge, $125 an hour if you want to get on the phone with us for about an hour and go over every detail of your build that you want. FYI, if you decide to work with us, that $125 or whatever you spent on consulting will be a direct credit to the build with us. So we're honestly just trying to avoid having people call us up like, hey bro, like, we're not your tech center, we're not your free hotline for any tech questions. We got bills to pay.
It's not like we're being dicks, but we don't have the time.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing, we get so many of these emails. Don't send us an email that says engine build, and then that's it. I mean, I'm not even being sarcastic, but we get a ton that just say engine build, and how do you answer that? We don't even know what kind of engine you have, and it's just 2 words. So if you send us an email that says engine build, we'll send you an email back saying yes.
Send monies here.
Also, don't forget to go to MotoIQ.com. Check us out. There's a lot of articles about this kind of stuff that you can read. I think we have the best tech website.
Absolutely.
Also, it really helps us a lot in YouTube's algorithm. Like and comment below. And don't forget to mash that subscribe button, because all this stuff helps. And if you want to see us continue this content, help us out. That just takes a second of your time.
And thank you for all the views, guys. The growth of our channel has been amazing. We hope we continue to do this and bring you more content, build more engines, and give you more details. So, see you next time.